So now we've got our filtering set up over in our API. Let's go back to our client and start configuring this. So I'm just going to clean up my windows again. And what we're going to start with this time is our activity store. And also in our agent.ts. Let's just open this at the same time, just so that we can take a look at where we're going with this. And what we're doing at the moment is, this was just a temporary option to pass in parameters for our activities and setting the query string manually inside here. We want to do something slightly more sophisticated than this. And what we'll do is we'll configure this in the activity store and we'll pass through the parameters as a URL search parameters object and then pass that object via Axios as configuration options for this particular request. And what we'll do to achieve this is we'll go back into our activity store and we'll create another observable, and this one will be for our predicate. So we'll say observable predicate equals, and we'll create this as a map because we want our query string parameters to go up as key value pairs. So our isGoing is going to be set to true, our limit is going to be set to a number, that sort of thing. So we'll create it as a new map. And what we also want to do is create an action to set the predicate. Now, just for convenience, I'd normally like to keep all my computed properties together and all of the MobX actions together as well, but just so that we can see what's going on inside here as we build this, let's just add our set predicate function or action here. So we'll add an action to set predicate. We'll take our predicate as a string and the value as a string, or in this case it could be a date because we're going to use the same for our isGoing or isHost as we are for the date predicate as well, so it can either be a string or a date. And the first thing we'll do is we'll clear any previous setting of the predicate. So we'll say list.predicate.clear. And if there is no predicate, then we're just going to be returning all of the activities. And what we'll say, if the predicate is not equal to all in this case, then what we'll do is say this.predicate.set, and we'll say the predicate and the value. Now we're also going to create some Axios parameters for our activity list query, and because this is going to be made up of what's contained in our predicate, as well as the information we have regarding our page, and the information regarding the limits, then we're going to add this as a computed property because we have all of the information we need here. So what I'm going to do is add a computed property, and we'll say get Axios params, and we'll say const params equals new, and we'll use URL search params for this. And URL search params is basically an interface that defines methods to work with the query string of a URL. So we'll use this. And then what we can do is build up our parameters, and the URL search params comes with a method called append, and what we'll do is append our key value pairs as our query string parameters. So first one will be the limit, and we'll set this to our limit, and we're getting a warning here because our limit is a number and the URL search params only takes strings because our query string parameter is of course a string. So we need to cast this into a string, so we'll use the string and pass in the limits to this, and then we'll append our offset. So we'll say params.append and the offset, and what we want to do here is format our string, so we'll add backticks and the $, and in the curly braces we'll say list.page, and we'll add a ternary operator here, and then say list.page multiplied by limit, or we'll set it to 0. And then we'll get our predicate and append this also to our query string parameter. Now we're only going to actually let the user select one of these options at any one time, but we'll still loop through this because this is a map. And what we'll do is we'll say list.predicates.forEach, and the first parameter is the value, the second parameter is the key, and then we'll say if the key is equal to the start date, then we'll say params.append, and we'll pass in the key, and then the value, which is going to be our date, we'll set it to an ISO string, which is something that we can pass up as a query string parameter. And if it isn't the start date, then what we'll do is we'll say params.append, and then the key and the value. And then we'll return the params. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass these Axios params down to our agent method from our load activities method. So let's scroll down to our load activities. And instead of passing down limit and list page, we'll pass down list.axios params. And of course we get the error because we also need to configure this in our agent.ts. And instead of taking the limit and the page, what we'll do is we'll take in our params, which is going to be a type of URL search params. And then what we'll do, we'll need to use Axios directly in here now so that we can pass in a configuration object to also send up the parameters. So what we'll do is we'll say axios.get, and then we'll say /activities, and then what we can do is pass in the configuration for this particular request. And one of the things that we can pass up inside here is a params object. So let's pass in params and then set this to our params that we're passing in for our request. And we also need to add the len statement after this. And what we'll do, we'll just also sleep in here for just 1 second, just to be consistent with the other requests. And we'll add another len statement, and then we'll pass back the response body. And then we'll go back to our activity store. And what we also want to do is automatically react to our predicate changing so that we load the activities based on the filter that we're sending up to our API. And we've done this sort of thing before, but we're going to do it again. We're going to use a mobx reaction so that we can do this automatically based on when our predicate changes here. And what we'll do is we'll add a reaction inside our constructor for our activity store. And what we want to base this on is if the predicate's keys have changed. So what we'll do in the expression here, we'll say list.predicates.keys, and whenever our predicate keys changes, then we'll run the expression inside this reaction. And the expression we want to run here is we want to set list.page back to 0. We want to clear our activities from the registry. So we'll use list.activityregistry.clear. And then we just want to load our activities. And because our Axios params are computed based on the predicate changing anyway, then this is going to request our new activities based on the filters that we're passing up to it. So this is the setup in place for our filters, and what we'll look at next is configuring this inside our components.